Cool. I think we're good to go. So welcome everyone to Change Your ID Day, the online version. First, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners on the land that we are streaming ourselves, which is for myself is the Bunurong and Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd like to acknowledge their and pay my respects to elders past, present, and future. As a Wiradjuri woman, I'm always very conscious that I'm living on someone else's land. So a few admin things. How this session will go is that we'll have some short guest speakers, including people from the Birth, Deaths and Marriages, and that will be followed by a Q&A session. And you should, just so everyone knows, this session is being recorded and will be available online later. I think that's all I needed to say for that. First up, I wanted to introduce Margot Fink, who is the Executive Officer of Transgender Victoria. To sort of talk about the campaign for birth certificate reform. Over to you, Margot.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My name's Margot. I use she, her pronouns. And I'm so thrilled to be here with you all, being able to say that we now live in a state that has passed fairer, more accurate, more inclusive, and more equal laws for transgender diverse people. In the documentation we can access and have, and even beyond the practical impacts day to day, just the message that sends and what that tells trans and gender diverse people of all ages. I find that so exciting and really invigorating, and a nice uplifting thing during a very strange time in all our lives, I think. I've been part of making this process happen for, goodness, I think about five years or so, and there've been so many others in our community who've been advocating around this and many other issues for even longer than that. And I just want to acknowledge the incredible members of our team here at TGV and so many others across the whole community who've really just tirelessly done everything they can to see the momentous change we saw at the start of this month become a reality and materialize. And also, of course, want to thank everyone at the Department of Birth, Deaths and Marriages who've been just incredible in working with us and collaborating with us to implement this since passage and make sure it's the best that it can be, and are continuing to be really wonderful and open-minded and quite collaborative with community and really listening to our voices. So I'm pretty thrilled to be here and to be part of this discussion today.
We also have Felicity Marlowe, who is the co-founder of Rainbow Families Victoria, that's for and by LGBTIQ parents of, children, for the parents of LGBTIQ children. I'll let Felicity introduce themselves and say a bit about what the background and the impact the reform is having. Don't forget to unmute yourself, Felicity.
I should know that by now. Hi everyone, my name is Felicity. I use she, her pronouns, and I am one of the co-founders of Rainbow Families Victoria. So Rainbow Families Victoria actually advocates and supports LGBTIQ parents and carers with children, and we do a lot of advocacy about the best interests and rights of our children. And of course, many of our children are also themselves trans, gender diverse and non-binary. So with that hat on, I've been part of a few different government working groups and task forces over the years, and was really proud to be part of the implementation committee alongside Sam and Margot, Natasha from Parents of Gender Diverse Children, and Kahava from Y Gender, among others. So I guess I wanted to say a few quick things about the impact of this law. So I guess the very first thing is that the changes wouldn't have come into effect without the, like Margot said, the sort of tenacity and resilience of some fantastic advocates. But I'm being particularly concerned about what the impact of this law would have on young people and children under the age of 18, and particularly under the age of 16. I think some of the issues that we've had in the past, and if anyone followed the 2016 attempt to get this law through, you'd know that conservatives and right-wingers and people that find talking about gender diversity for some reason incredibly threatening made a bigger effort to say that children don't know what they're doing, children are being coerced, children are being forced to have surgery, given hormones against their will, etc. And you still see here in the UK and in the US a lot of advocacy around trying to change people's minds about that, to say that actually children know, or anyone who's spent any time with children know, they're pretty adamant about lots of things. They know what they want, and with the right guidance, support, and you know, people around them that can support them, transgender, diverse and non-binary children are able to be themselves. So I think, if anything, this change to the law is on the backs of the tenacity and resilience of not just activists, but lots of young people who have stood up and said, this is who I am, this is me, and the fantastic parents and carers that have stood with them and said, yes, and we're going to fight and support you to be yourself. Another really important part about this legal reform is that we had some really early on supporters, and one of them I want to name is the Australian Social Workers Association. So the impact of the legislation change is that in the legislation it states that a child under 16 requires to have a doctor or a psychologist to sign a consent form to say it's in their best interests and the child understands the consent. And of course that was a bit of a contested issue amongst many advocates and parents, particularly if your non-binary or trans child doesn't experience gender dysphoria or isn't in a situation where actually needing to see a doctor or a medical profession is part of who they are, part of what they need to do. And there are many kids that fall into that category. So early on, we were advocating for support to say, what about in regulations you allowed children other options of people who could say, yes, I think this child understands what's going on, they can be themselves, they can change their birth certificate. And the Australian Social Workers Association was one of the first organisations that came on board. So while in the end, you know, what the arguments they made were really persuasive, I think, as an association. And I just think they need some credit for that as well. And I guess finally, the thing that I wanted to talk about is I'm a queer woman, but I'm also the parent of a non-binary child. So I'm going to call them Moo. And Moo came out as non-binary when they were 8 and in grade 3. And we were at actually a Rainbow Families camp, and we went around and did our names and pronouns, and they said, well, mine are they, them. And we were like, oh, okay, that's an interesting conversation we haven't had yet with you. But they were really adamant that they are non-binary and that they want people to use they, them. So that's been an interesting discussion, I guess, for us as parents at school. I think when you are queer yourself or trans yourself and you're a parent, sometimes there can be a fear that people will judge your child differently because, or think that you've made them who they are. But like I like to remind people that say that I had straight parents and they didn't do a very good job because I'm definitely not straight. So the thing about Moo that we were really excited about with this legal reform is that it means this year, they're in year 6 now, in a few weeks we have to enrol them in, put in the application to enrol them into high school for year 7, and they're only 11 years old now. But they are absolutely thrilled on the 1st of May to be able to, they went and filled in their forms, and we went and got their Prep 1-2 teacher who'd known them for over 12 months to sign the form. They chose that person to be the person to sign the form. And that means for someone like Moo, they can start their high school career as themselves. And they haven't chosen to change their name yet, but they want to by the end of the year. And it's going to make a huge difference for their self-esteem and sense of who they are as they go through adolescence. So the change in the regulations to allow children to have someone who's known them for over 12 months means for someone like Moo and other kids who are non-binary, gender diverse or trans like them, they just have to find someone that knows them and that they trust. And like I say, for Maud, it meant we could go to their Prep 1-2 teacher, who was their, you know, their best teacher ever, the teacher they'll always remember. And she was thrilled to be able to have the honour of signing those forms. And it made it a really special occasion for Maud to have a grown-up who they'd known all of their life at school, who they could trust to sign that form. So for me as a parent, it was fantastic not to have to put my child through a medical appointment or a psych appointment in order to be able to have them decide for themselves who they are. We really need to get on to putting in the forms so that we can get all that done, and we will. There's nothing like homeschooling 3 children and working full time to make you realise how many admin tasks you don't get done when you're not at work. So we'll be getting that in soon. Moo's really excited about having their new birth certificate. And I think for lots of children, it's going to make a really big difference, because when you do things like open a bank account, you need to show your birth certificate. When you enrol in lots of extracurricular activities, you have to show your birth certificate. When you're enrolling in school or changing schools, you're required to show your birth certificate. So the sooner we can get children who themselves are saying, this is who I am, to change that fundamental piece of documentation, it's going to make them feel a lot safer in the world and a lot more like people actually know who they are and they won't be hiding. And I think for anyone who themselves is a member of the LGBTQI+ communities, lots of us have memories of being quite young and being fearful of people knowing who you were and feeling like you couldn't be yourself, particularly at those really formative stages of our lives, changing schools, you know, getting your first job, opening a bank account. And all those kids now who are able to change their birth certificate because of this fantastic law reform get a chance to be themselves. So I guess finally, I was just really thrilled to be part of a fantastic team of people who advocated for this. I know there's people like Kahava from Wine Gender and Isabel, as well as Margot, who put some fantastic effort into surveys and talking to adults about what it's going to mean for young people under the age of 18 and 16. And they really should be congratulated, because this is a generational change for so many people. So thank you.
That was amazing. I wasn't part of the campaign, but it's so wonderful to hear how you speak, but also to know that this is going to be such a positive impact for so many people and so many kids. I have a young person myself, and unfortunately, we're both born in New South Wales, where you're still required to undergo surgery to access ID markers, change like that. So our next couple of speakers are actually from the Department of Births and Marriages. We've got Kira and Christina. If you'd like to introduce yourselves, they're just going to go over a quick overview of the changes. After that, Sam Elkin of the LGBTIQ Legal Service will say a few words, and then we'll open up to question and answer.
Thanks, Sarah. My name's Kira. I work at the Registry of Births and Marriages. I've been part of this reform for quite a long time now, so it's great to see some familiar faces on screen, because it's really a very unique experience talking to you don't know who you're talking to. Look, I go by the pronouns of she and her, and I don't want to take up too much time with the reforms. I'll just give a brief overview of what those reforms are, and really just we're here just to see how we can assist here at this event with any questions. My colleague Christina, who is from the operations area, she's part of the team who are actually processing these applications. Myself and Rue, to people who are on screen might know her, she and I have been really working quite closely with the department in trying to get these reforms through, and we are still involved quite deeply. But in terms of processing the applications, that as we start to normalise this process, it stop being such a new thing, it's going to shift into a standard application process that we do at the registry, which is great. So that's why we've got Christina here today. I did just want to start with saying that really these reforms do completely rewrite what was originally in the legislation. So the key point being that no longer do people have to undergo sex affirmation surgery, and we're opening it up. It's opened up to children as well, which Felicity gave a great introduction to. In summary, the application for adults is a fairly straightforward process, which is really nominating a sex descriptor of your choice, and then basically providing your own statutory declaration. This is all included in the application form, and also bringing in a supporting person who basically is just saying that this is the supporting person being an adult who has known you for 12 months to say that they support your application, and that's quite a straightforward process. That application process is available to Victorian-born people. Because it is also open to people who aren't born in Victoria, but there is a difference in terms of we have state-based registries, so we can only change your birth certificate if your birth is registered here in Victoria. If you're not born in Victoria, you can apply for a certificate that acknowledges a change, but it isn't like changing the record of your birth on your birth certificate. So we'd encourage people, while that certificate is available, really to change your birth certificate, you'd have to go back to the jurisdiction of your birth. The other key reform has really been about opening up this process to children, and I know Felicity has spoken to that a little bit. It is a little bit more complicated, and it is something that does take a little bit of effort. So I do acknowledge the administration that must be involved in going through that. Essentially, the child, as with the adult, can nominate a sex descriptor of their choice that they want on their record, their birth certificate. There are some other things there. The application has to be made on their behalf, and that's either a parent or a guardian. The parent or the guardian has to make a statutory declaration that this is in the best interests of the child, and there's a few other little things that are in that statutory declaration included on the form. And there's also the section from a supporting person, and it is great to see that that's opened up beyond what the legislation said, which is initially doctors and psychologists, but also now it's opened up to an adult who has known the child for 12 months that's not their parent or guardian. So that's another part of the form that has to be completed. Again, this is also available, like, in addition to children born in Victoria, to children who aren't born in Victoria, but the same issues arise in terms of if you're not born in Victoria, we can't change your birth certificate. We can provide you with a certificate, but we would certainly encourage you to go back to the jurisdiction you were born in, if that's available to you, to actually be able to change your birth record. So I might just tie it up there. It's very high level, but much more interested in the questions and, you know, getting into the detail than what people are interested in.
So just really quickly, Christina Theodoris, I manage the post office here at the registry, so that's all the ins and outs of the registry, so all certificates go through my team, and I jumped on board of the legislation and implementing the changes back in, I think, December of last year. So it's been quite exciting times to be able to open this up and to be able to process applications for children as well. So we're starting off, we started producing certificates last week, and we'll continue to do that this week as well. So it's exciting to be able to send out certificates that don't show any you know, change of sex on the history side, or, you know, outing someone with what their former name was. So yeah, it's quite exciting to be able to produce those and have them sent out. So yeah.
Thank you. And finally, I'll throw over to Sam, that I work with at St Kilda Legal Service, as in the LGBTIQ Legal Service, which is like a health justice partnership with St Kilda and Thorn Harbour Health, to say a few words.
Thanks, Sarah Jo. Hi, everyone. It's exciting to see you all, at least some of you, in on the screen. Yeah, we set up Change Your ID Day last year, which was a in real life event, and that was basically intended to give people an opportunity to change their ID in a safe and supportive environment. And the reason I was really keen to set that up is because, like, I myself had a lot of trouble when I was changing my identity documents with everybody. It really didn't have a very good run for some reason. So yeah, I was just really keen to bring everybody together to try and make it a positive experience as opposed to a really kind of difficult and frustrating and upsetting one. And I think that we managed to do that last year, which I was really, really happy about. And now this year, you know, in a year where we don't have like heaps to celebrate in some senses, it is really exciting to be talking about the implementation of a really important piece of law reform. I had the opportunity to interview like some real trailblazers of the transgender rights movement in Victoria over the last year, including Kayleen White and Julie Peters and Sally Goldner, who are all part of setting up Transgender Victoria and has done that advocacy for, you know, over 20 years now. And it's, yeah, really exciting to feel like you are part of history and you're actually seeing a positive change take place that so many people have been fighting, you know, for generations for. So yeah, it's a really positive experience to be working with the Victorian Births, Deaths and Marriages in such a positive way and in such a collaborative way. So I'm really grateful to them and to the advocates that have provided such useful support, and yeah, definitely acknowledge in particular the worth, the youth-related work that Felicity and Margot and others have done. It's so important and something that I would have never thought about because I don't tend to work with young people that much, and that just goes to show how important it is to get different voices and people with different expertise in the room, not just around law reform, but implementation of law reform, because you just forget really important things. So it's, yeah, it's just so wonderful and such a collaborative process. I, like many people who live in Victoria, was somebody who wasn't born in Victoria. So like I myself won't be able to get a new birth certificate, but I'll be getting a registered details certificate. But I did want to do a shout out to anybody who's on the call or might know somebody who lives in Victoria but was born either interstate or in a different territory or overseas. Certainly at the LGBTIQ Legal Service, we'd be more than happy to help you try and navigate that process with your various registration body, wherever it is. You know, we've certainly got expertise with some of the other states and territories. Always a work in progress learning about jurisdictions in other countries, but there's so many interesting advocacy organisations all around the world now doing this stuff. So we'd love to work with you to find out more about how we can support people that might have been born overseas to change their IDs. So do get in touch with us if you're in that boat like me, because yeah, very important to make sure that we can all you know, try and get our identity documents right. And for anybody in particular who was born in New South Wales or Queensland or WA, we've got a way to go in terms of law reform there. So if you are interested in being part of, you know, a case study or something like that, so that people, advocates in other states and territories can push for that law reform, please just shoot us an email after this, because we'd be more than happy to link you up with other activists in other states and territories, because, you know, it's happened here, it's happening in other places. So we really want to make sure that the whole of Australia can benefit from these kind of changes, because they are so important. That's probably it for me in terms of why I wanted to set something like this up. I'm really keen to get questions from people. We've had so many emails and Facebook posts over the last kind of month or so with questions. So if people want to put their questions in the chat box, I think, we can read them out and try and answer them. Because yeah, it's meant to be a collaborative process. So please do, don't feel shy. Don't be a lurker. If you've got some random question, now's the time. So yeah, thank you.
We've also, we've got a Q&A function in the webinar, which is, I should add, kindly hosted by the Victoria Law Foundation, which was a funding partner for the LGBTIQ Legal Service. So at the bottom of your screen, there should be some options. One of them is Q&A and one of them is chat. In the chat, you can ask questions to the panelists, and then in the Q&A, you can type it in And then the panelists have the option to either answer live or they can type their answer in. Yes, you can also raise your hand. Like there should be a raise your hand function. And I really apologize if I get this wrong, because I have done it before. And I think if you raise your hand, I have the ability to unmute you and you can ask your question in your own voice. Wonderful. I will first off throw to Axel.
Hi, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. Thanks so much for putting this panel together. Very informative. I'm just wondering how I would go about, okay, my journey's been a nightmare process because I was assigned female at birth. I'm intersex and I was born in New South Wales. I've just had a surgery and I've got some of my medical records, but not all of them. So I guess my question is, how, as an intersex person, do I go about getting my authentic self listed on all of my documents? So I'm non-binary, is they, them pronouns. Technically I'm transgender, but I identify as intersex. I don't really know where to start with it. And I have had surgery, which could count as gender confirming surgery. Please help.
Yeah. Anyone like to take that or have any ideas? It's sort of hard because Gwen born in a different state. Sam?
Yes, thanks for that, Axel. Yeah, I think that probably to get the documentation that is going to be most useful, changing it in New South Wales would be the way to go. And that's something that we can certainly support you with. So if you send us a quick email to that email address that's in the chat, which I hope you can see, we can connect directly and actually work on that process. My understanding is you could get a registered detail certificate here in Victoria if you wanted to, but it might not have as much value in terms of being a practical tool that you can use to get all of your IDs consistent as it would be going back to New South Wales. But feel free to correct me, Kira and Christina, if I've got that wrong.
Kira, you're muted.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes, thanks, Sam, for bringing us in relation to the recognised detail certificate. Basically, it doesn't. I have to admit, the practical weight that has for other agencies in order to update the other identity documents that they issue, I can't really comment on. But suffice, I can say that the recognised detail certificate is not it doesn't certify anything. It doesn't certify any details that are in a register. So it's not a very weighty piece of documentation that other agencies will accept. I can't say for sure how other agencies will deal with that, but it's certainly not something we would recommend people use to try to update their certificate, because it doesn't actually certify or register any record of what's held in a birth register.
So from a perspective of passports, they will accept a recognised detail certificate, and then they only have male, female or other, which would translate onto your passport as X. So if you do have a recognised detail certificate, you could use it there. If you do Google recognised detail certificate, you'll see what agencies will accept it. That's where you don't have a birth certificate that confirms your, your chosen sex. So where New South Wales won't actually update a birth certificate, you could If you haven't had surgery and you don't meet their legislative requirements, you could potentially look at doing a recognised detail that you would have a difference between your birth certificate that would still have your sex at birth versus a recognised detail certificate that would have your preferred sex on it. So yeah, it's up to the individual agency as to whether they'll accept it or not. But if you do a bit of research and Google recognised detail certificate Australia, you can see what agencies will accept that as a form of updating your preferred sex or gender on their database. So yeah, you can go from there.
I might just add, Brenda from TGV has put on the chat that in Victoria, intersex people can correct their birth certificate rather than change as per this recent legislation. So that also might be an avenue. Brenda, if you want to speak to that, I think you need to raise your hand in the forum thingy, and then Sarah Jo can unmute you if you want to.
There we go.
Don't feel obliged.
I think, Brenda?
I don't know what applies in New South Wales, but I do know through the process over the last year or last few years, we've had a lot of discussions with the intersex community in Victoria to ensure that the changes that have just been introduced didn't negatively impact on intersex people. And that was the case. Intersex people have been able to correct their birth certificate relatively easily in Victoria, and it might be worth Axel checking to see whether or not that's possible in New South Wales. But unfortunately in New South Wales, they don't yet have the legislation that we have that allows for person to choose their own sex descriptor. And so here we're able to choose male, female, or nominate any other sex descriptor that we want. And we would love that New South Wales, Queensland, and other territories and so on could have that same option.
Thank you. That's really helpful. Thank you. I'll look into that.
Kira, I just noticed in the Q&A there's a lot of questions about financial support and whether you can change your name and your sex descriptor at the same time, and do you have to pay 2 fees? So I thought maybe they're the practical questions you could answer.
Yeah, I can certainly speak to that. If you change your name and change your record of sex at the same time and submit those applications together, we'll dispense with the change of name fee. So it's just one fee. Both applications are generally seen as separate processes and have a separate fee associated with them, and it is expensive. I acknowledge that it's over $100. So I think it's been a really great thing to be able to facilitate a process where people who are changing their sex and wanting to change their name at the same time, which are related events, we can certainly waive the change of name fee in that regard.
Could I just chime in as well on financial support? Transgender Victoria has been in the very fortunate position to have been able to set up a fund to help support people that need financial support in lodging their applications, thanks to a very generous donation from Vic Bears and other community partners. And that can be accessed just over on our website. That's tgv.org.au/ID support fund. I'll make sure that we circulate that accordingly as well. But that's another avenue for people who perhaps don't have access to the funds, but quite urgently would like to get their documentation updated. It's just a simple web form where you give us relevant details and then we can coordinate with you through our community engagement team to make that possible. And we're really excited to be able to do that and make sure everyone has access to this.
Yeah. We do have a question specifically, from 80 Ryan, who wants to know if you're changing your name and your sex at the same time, do you pay 2 fees?
I think that just to reiterate what I was saying before, just to say that if you're changing your record of sex and name at the same time, we will waive the change of name fee. So you just pay one. You do have to submit both applications at the same time at this stage.
Yeah.
I've just noticed too on Q&A, there's a bit of discussion just around why we're saying sex descriptors and not gender descriptors. And I think that's always been a tricky issue. It's about what the wording of the legislation, and that the legislation uses sex descriptors. And even though that's not in practice what we know it means, that's the legislative language that's being used. Again, Kiara can probably talk more to that, but that's again some of the issues, I guess, that come up when you're fitting real life, practical, day-to-day people's experiences into a piece of rigid legislation and accompanying regulations. How do you advocate to work around that to make it actually practical and meaningful for the people that it's supposed to be supporting? And definitely the use of language is one of those ones that is of concern, but at the time it also has political implications that made potentially the arguments for some change. And I say this as an advocate, not as a lawyer or anything. Sometimes the language you use is really powerful and also useful to help law reform get through. And it can sometimes be the compromise you make to get the outcome that you want. And I'm not advocating that that's the best thing, but sometimes that's why there's confusion about language. But just as a brief answer, it's what's in the legislation. They use the word sex descriptor, and that's the word that therefore the Births, Deaths and Marriages staff were bound to use when we put together all of the forms and other implementation processes.
I can only basically support what Felicity said there, that we are stuck with the term sex because of what's in the legislation. So it's something that we're unable to change at this point. If there's an opportunity to reform the legislation again, perhaps that's something we can reconsider. But at this stage, we are stuck with it, unfortunately.
Yeah. I will say, so in the Q&A pop-up box, if you want to, you can actually click on an answer and say answer live, and then it notifies the person. Ada Black wrote a little while ago that they want to get started on the process of changing my name and gender details. However, I'm a little freaked out by all the interdependencies. For example, I believe some stuff happened with the hex. I don't want to read too much of it. This is kind of a broad question. Could you perhaps highlight some of these potential interdependent issues to be aware of before starting it all? Read like things like hex debts and ATO records.
I can try and give that a go. With hex in particular, my understanding is, and I'm certainly not a taxation lawyer, so far off being a taxation lawyer, but my understanding is that it's the tax file number that links to your, your university entry. So that hex debt will follow you around, whether or not you change your name with births, deaths and marriages. If only it was so easy. But I don't think that there would be a problem there. But certainly and I can only speak from my own experience, like it is a bureaucratic nightmare having all of your paperwork in different names and sex markers, and trying to get it consistent is probably a great way to streamline your well-being. But I completely agree that it's a very difficult process at the moment. And, if you think about the amount of institutions and companies that everybody has a relationship with, whether it be your phone company or your university or whatever, like you're talking about changing your details with, 30 different organizations, and it can be quite overwhelming. And all I can say is that, if you want support through that process, like we're very happy to help with that. It's not necessarily a kind of legal issue as such, but certainly happy to facilitate that for anybody who's having trouble just getting all of their paperwork in order. I hope that helps a bit.
I could just add, as Sam has said, in practice, when you change your documentation, most predominantly with name, you'll typically have to go on a bit of a flurry or barrage of changing documentations over with many organisations, both government and private. And I'm 5 years on, and even as recently as last week, I realised I had a couple of old accounts in an old name. As long as you have the relevant documentation, in most cases, it's not too much of a drama, as long as you can demonstrate this is how I was recorded then, this is who I am, and you've got that paper trail. In most cases, it's pretty manageable. I also notice in the chat, Ada, a question around dramatic things happening to, or having to pay up front for a course if a mismatch is identified. To my knowledge, that's not an issue. I think the most that would happen is you would be contacted to help explain what's going on there, and then you'd need to provide the relevant documentation. But as long as you have that, that shouldn't incur any kind of immediate or upfront payment in full from a tertiary body.
Yeah. Yeah. So we did have some other questions around how the updating your sex gender marker sort of transfers across to other government organizations. So like someone's asked about like Centrelink, and also some other people have asked about sort of like a list of all the different bits of ID that you'll need to change, well, that you may want to change when you get that your birth certificate changed. And also how, though, that if you choose something other than male/female, how will other institutions and workplaces deal with that? And are there options? What are the options?
Well, I can answer maybe a little bit of that. So Vic Roads, for example, you can have X, I believe, and certainly Vic Roads sends me documentation in like MUX, so you can use that gender neutral title if you want with Vic Roads. So that's the answer to that particular institution. But I think more broadly, it probably does remain to be seen how, you know, the hundreds and hundreds of organisations are going to deal with the birth certificate law reform in Victoria in terms of what the flow-on effect is for how they, you know, have all their databases. I certainly hope that as you know, non-binary or people that fall outside the gender binary and have a different marker, you know, start presenting these documents to various banks and other organisations, that means that there's a flow-on effect so that other organisations update their record system to more accurately reflect people's gender identities. But I do think that there'll probably be a bunch of teething issues in terms of how these reforms are implemented by various other agencies in terms of them updating the paperwork. So maybe that's a bit of the answer.
Yeah, we do have some wonderful and helpful links that our panelists are putting in the chat. However, it's only being sent to the other panelists. So I'm going to just pop those into the attendees list. And we've got Natalie, who would like to ask a question. I'm just going to throw over to Natalie while I type. Are you there, Natalie? Natalie?
Is
Maybe.
it better?
Oh yeah. Hey Natalie.
Yeah, now we
Hi.
can hear you. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Natalie. Nice to meet you all. Just two questions. Is there two separate forms to change your name and your gender marker? And also, where do I start? Where do I start? Do I do the when I fill the form off the birth deaths and marriages, like, can I change my name on the same form, or is it just two separate forms? That's my purpose is.
Yep. Hi, Natalie. At this stage, it is two separate forms. So please have a look at the change of record of sex to change the gender marker on your birth certificate. That form needs to then be submitted if you want to change your name at the same time, which will also mean that you can get a fee waiver for the change of name. You'll need to email, and these instructions are on the form for changing a record of sex. You'll need to email Birth, Deaths and Marriages Corrections Team, which is BDM Corrections. Actually, Christina might have to help me with this. BDM Corrections at Justice.
Yeah.
.vic.gov.au. Perhaps I'll try to work out a way to type that in. And basically, once you've then received the change of name application form to complete, you need to complete them together and then submit them to the registry as well. So that's basically the process. Christina, did you want to add anything to that?
No, you can, so you just need they're two separate forms at this stage. We are working towards having a one platform online, but that's still being tested at the moment. So at the present time, two application forms that we'll accept for a change of name as well as a change of sex.
Who do I I know I need a stat deck to change my name. Who do I get the witness at? Can I have my doctor or anybody, or my therapist or anybody like that, or is a particular person I have to get?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Natalie. You do need to have statutory declarations are legal documents, and you will need to have them witnessed by people who have the authority to witness a statutory declaration. I'd encourage you to go to the Department of Justice and Community Safety website for a full list, because it has been expanded recently, and hopefully that will make it easier for you to find the person, particularly in these circumstances as well. And I can imagine it's with the impacts of COVID-19, these legal requirements are a little bit more difficult to complete. Sam, I just was wondering, do you have anybody in particular from that list that you think would be helpful for Natalie to go to for a statutory declaration?
We could probably do it. I'm not sure, I might have missed where Natalie is living. Are you regional or in that central area?
I'm Metro to Melbourne. I'm out northwest of Melbourne.
Okay. Yeah, well, certainly that's something that the LGBTIQ legal service would help you with in a practical sense. If you're concerned about going to, another organisation like a police station or whatever to get things signed, like we'd be more than happy to do that for you. But yeah, again, if you just shoot us an email, I'd be more than happy to try and work out in your particular area what all the options are, because, I know that getting out and about at the moment is difficult, and it might be better for you to go somewhere local. So yeah, we can troubleshoot that if you just send me an email.
Okay, thank you.
And sort of building on Natalie's question, a few people have asked about the requirements for the person that needs to have known you for at least 12 months when you are making the application to birth, deaths and marriages. Someone has asked if you need to have that for an adult as well, or just for children, and whether or not that person could be a family member or related in some way.
So it really does depend on whether it's an adult application or child application. For the adult applications, the supporting person can be any adult that you've known for 12 months. That's basically the requirement. It's a very, hopefully quite a light on requirement, something that's not too onerous or too hard to get someone to complete that supporting, complete the documentation and sign off on being a supporting person, supporting your application. For children, it's a different process. A supporting person has to be someone, it could be a doctor, could be a psychologist, or it could be someone who's known the child for 12 months, but it can't be their parent or guardian. So not someone who's making the application on their behalf. It's sort of seen as someone who's independent of the application process, bringing in a different person to the process to provide that support. The supporting person for a child application, you are also, the supporting person is also asked to state not only that they support the application, but that the application is also in that child's best interests. So there are some things in there that are a little bit more, I suppose, make it a little bit more difficult for the person who is the supporting person, maybe to get their head around and understand what they're doing. But there is information on the Births, Deaths and Marriages website about how in signing up to those things, or in completing the supporting statement as a supporting person, the things you might want to turn your mind to. So I'd encourage people who are asked to be a supporting person for children and they're a little bit unsure about it, just to check out the information that's on the website, and hopefully that can assist you.
Can I just jump in there, just on the children under 16, if the parent or guardian doesn't consent, then it becomes a completely different process, unfortunately, and it may involve federal family law situations, or it might result in other legal supports being required. So I think some people have said they're supporting children who are 17 but don't want to tell their parents about it. Well, that will be really difficult, and so you'd probably need legal advice from the St Kilda Legal Service or someone else about how you would go about supporting a child to do that without parental consent, if they're still living, if the parents and guardians are still their parents and guardians. The other one that someone asked was about the range of sex description or gender markers you can name, like what you can do. And there's a fantastic section, which I think Sarah Jo has now shared with all attendees, that says all the things, like whether it can be, can't use swear words or hashtags or anything like that. But one thing that really should be noted is that Kahava and Margot particularly, and I think Brenda Appleton, worked on a fantastic list of, over 80 different possible descriptors. Margot, do you want to talk about that? And just, I think it's really important to recognise you can self-identify in an incredible array of ways, and unless it falls outside or inside the list of things that aren't allowed, then it's a fairly open process. And Caro, you might want to comment on that too, but go, Margot.
Yeah, thank you, Felicity. I think that sums it up pretty well. But essentially, we did a lot of work in the early months of implementation to ensure we had as broad and comprehensive a list as we could, sourced from community, people in our organisations, other parts of the trans and gender diverse community, to really be a representative and broad list. But we also recognise that there's no one true, complete final list, and that this is a rapid and ever-evolving area. So beyond that initial foundation, for anyone that applies using terms that are recognised already, they'll be identified in that list, and that's fine. For anything that falls outside of that, they'll be looked at, and if they don't trip up any major problems, aren't obviously using swear words or words that aren't acceptable in that context, then it will be added essentially to the list. I believe, Kira, you might have to correct me on this or clarify, but if it comes up again in subsequent applications, it'll become a part of that primary list.
Yeah. Thanks, Margot. I think really you've helped to really introduce the topic of what is available to have on your birth record now as a sex descriptor or gender marker. So yes, absolutely. There is it has been broadened to what the applicant is comfortable with. There are some parameters that do limit some certain gender markers that people might ask for. Ultimately, it is something that's the registry will make a decision on a case-by-case basis. So we don't, as you said, there's not like a finite list of things that are either in or out. So it will be it'll be something that we learn more about when as the community makes these applications, and as we get applications into the future, it's something we'll be constantly learning about. I have noticed that, at least I can see it on our chat function, that Felicity has put up, I think it was Felicity, or maybe I've lost track now, but it was certainly around the sex markers that we have published the registry on our website. It's a very high level sort of guidance around what sort of sex descriptors or gender markers you can put on your birth certificate that the law provides for, because there are some things, as you've said, Margot and Felicity, that the law prohibits, and that is obscene or offensive words. And also things that might be like symbols, or that are like acronyms, are things that can fall into that category that are not recognised as a gender marker. But that's something that will evolve, and we'll be looking at as applications are made and into the future. So I'd encourage you to look at what's published on our website in that regard. If you've got some questions about, what sort of gender marker can I put on my birth certificate?
And that's pretty consistent with the existing standards for change of name as well.
Yes, it's that's exactly right. We do also have the legal framework that guides how you can change your name on your birth certificate. That has really informed the framework as well for what sex descriptors are available to put on your birth certificate.
And we've also had Paul Kidd write in the chat to the panelists that there are some new regulations that enable stat decks to be witnessed remotely as part of the COVID-19 omnibus legislation. I haven't actually heard anything about that. I'm not sure if anyone has, or Paul, you could even raise your hand and chat about it.
I can only say that I know that it's been given consideration, but I'm not sure of where that has.
I'll throw to Paul.
Yeah, just really quickly, there are some regulations that have just in the last week or two come out. They modify the Wills Act and the Statutory Declarations, the Oaths Act. Various acts are amended, and the procedures are not very straightforward. They're complicated, but it is possible if people need to sign a statutory declaration and don't want to be in the physical, or can't be in the physical presence of the witness. There are processes in place, so that legislation does exist. You probably need a lawyer to make sense of it, but it is possible.
Yeah, and Paul works with the Fitzroy Legal Service as well, just FYI. We did have a question about a few questions about the timelines for applications and getting your new forms back, particularly in regards to COVID-19. Most justice service centres and births and marriages offices are closed at the moment. I'm not sure of any plans to reopen. So yeah, and getting it done remotely.
In terms of turnaround times, I might throw to my colleague Christina if she's got an update on how we're tracking.
So for applications for a change of sex or a recognised detail certificate is 28 days from receipt of a compliant application. So that means you've got your supporting statement, you've got your statutory declaration signed, you've surrendered any certificates that have been issued by the Registry of Births, Deaths and Marriages in the past. So yeah, published turnaround time's 28 days. We are taking into consideration if people require it urgently for enrolments or for any other reasons, as long as they give us an explanation as to why they need it earlier. Like I said earlier at the beginning of this session, we've started to process applications. So it's taking less than 28 days, but it's also in relation to how many staff members we have present. We do have a reduced workforce. We have closed our front-facing counter. We don't have a time frame for when we will reopen. Same for the justice service centres across the Victorian region. We don't know when they will reopen. We will most likely provide an update once Dan Andrews provides an update as to what the state restrictions are going to look like. So the only way to actually submit applications is either by emailing them to us or post them to our GPO box, which is listed on the application forms. So yeah, we're trying to aim as much as we can to get them within the 28 days, but it just depends on the actual workforce that we do have, which is a reduced capacity at the moment. So hopefully that answers your question.
Muted myself. Sort of building on that, so Melissa has asked in the quick Q&A, just a quick question about if you're doing change of name and change of sex marker as well. The change of name form asks for your gender. Should this be filled out as per the gender specified on your current birth certificate or the one that you're requesting? And then vice versa, if you're the change of record of sex asks for your name, should it be your current legal name or the one you're wanting?
Yeah, so for both of those forms, we'll fill it in as of what your name is and what your your birth sex is as of today. So fill it in. So yeah, what your current details are, because it's asking you from a change of name perspective what your new name will be, and then from the change of sex perspective, it'll ask you what your new sex descriptor will be. So from an administrative position here at BDM, we will do the change of name first, and then we will do the change of sex process. So yeah, you just need to fill it in as per your birth certificate currently.
There's a question here about marriage certificates and change of ID documents. So I thought I might read this one out because I don't know the answer to it. So I'd be interested to know. So it says, I'm married and changing my gender from male to female. My partner and I both wish to change the use of our surname to both hyphenate our surnames. Usually we produce our marriage certificate in order to update documents with all organisations. However, now our marriage certificates will include my old name. How do I go about updating that in line with my birth certificate change? Can this also be submitted with my birth certificate change? Because I'm worried about updating my details twice with Centrelink.
So I might throw to Kira just to speak about the legislative requirements here, because the Marriages Act is a Commonwealth Act, which is separate to the Births and Marriages Victoria Act of 1996. So Kira can give you a bit of a legal spiel about it.
Yeah, as Christine has rightly pointed out, the marriage is a Commonwealth jurisdiction. We can't alter marriage certificates or anything like that. That is for the Commonwealth to decide whether that is something that can be done. In terms, particularly in relation to how your how you might be described in terms of your whether your status at the time of being married, whether you're a bride or a groom and things like that. It is seen that preliminary advice we've received from the Commonwealth has been that it's a moment in time certificate. So we certainly don't have any jurisdiction to make any changes to those certificates. We just register them. Really, that's all we have jurisdiction to do. So it's really up to the Commonwealth if they want to make any changes to that actual certificate. But like I said, at the moment we haven't heard that that's what will be happening, or that is something that they're intending to do. So yeah, it's seen as a moment in time. Does that answer the question fully, or was there some more bits to it that needed?
I think it had to, I think it's been moved, but it asked about how they go about updating their name. So you wouldn't be able, there's a few different things that need to happen here. So most people that are born in Australia, married in Australia, can use their marriage certificate to, assume their spouse's name or make a hyphenation, all that kind of stuff. But you do need to produce your certificate to do that. So you would go into Vic Roads and say, I want to hyphenate my surname to my husband's name, and they'll accept that. In this scenario, I would imagine that they potentially might out themselves if they do produce a marriage certificate that had a different sex compared to their birth certificate. So in relation to, say, updating a name, you would probably have to go through the actual legal name change process if you don't want to submit your marriage certificate as evidence of how that name came about. That would be the only way you could go about not actually producing this marriage certificate that has a different sex compared to, say, your birth certificate. Hopefully that makes a bit of sense.
We've also had a few questions about, are there any particular support services or workers or programs in Vic that can help people navigate that process? Particularly, someone has asked about people in the country, like in rural areas. I think maybe Margot and Felicity might be able to answer some of those questions.
No, sorry. We've filled in one part of the form. I haven't looked at the others. And Rainbow Families Victoria, we're not really able to provide that kind of support at the moment, but I'm sure that's something I'm happy to, as an organisation, provide support to some of the TGD services, but as we can't provide individual advocacy on how to do that at the moment. Thanks.
Yeah.
Sorry, could you just clarify the question a bit?
Sure. So so George has written, other than the LGBTIQ legal service represented here today, are there any particular support services, workers or programs in Vic that can help people specifically to navigate the process of changing their gender or name with the BDM?
At least from a non-legal standpoint, members of the TGB can offer a degree of support. We're developing a new range of fact sheets and documentations in line with all of the new changes. We have an existing library of those that obviously are now out of date, and we've been rapidly working with community, as well as fielding questions from community over the past month and looking at what difficulties they've run into as the most common FAQ type things. So we do have some amount of capacity to, whether it's via email, via phone, or through other means, offer support, which are mainly volunteer-led, so capacity and response time varies. But we are able to at least help answer questions and guide community members who maybe get stuck or feel a bit intimidated by the breadth of the process. And that's obviously statewide for anyone who has access to technology and internet at the moment.
Yeah. Someone did ask a question about their supporting a First Nations person through the process. I'm not sure of the age of who that was supporting, but I will say that if you're after a First Nations specific program, I'm not aware of any specifically, but there are places like Black Rainbow that do advocacy and sort of like community support, not like sort of social work. But you can also, there's the Victorian Aboriginal Community Controlled Health Organisation, so VATCHO, which is the peak body for health for Aboriginal health organisations in Victoria, are starting up a Pride network. So I would encourage you to get in contact with them. Someone has asked that they're concerned about their birth certificate getting lost in the mail, and that plus male bit is a bit unreliable at the moment. And their understanding is that there is no way to drop off their old birth certificate in person, because you do have to return your existing documents.
Yeah, so I'll jump in here. Yes, that's correct. We're closed. So you can't present in person, whether it's at our Melbourne office or any of the Justice Service Centres. Australia Post seem to be fine at the moment. We'd recommend that you do send it via Express Post. So you do have a tracking number. You can track how far along it's going. When it comes to births, deaths and marriages, it will most likely show that it's arrived in Port Melbourne, which is the distribution centre that will collect our mail and then drop it off to us that next morning. So if anybody is concerned, they can always email us at bdmcorrections@justice.vic.gov.au with their tracking number, and we can confirm once we've received their application or the certificate being surrendered to us. Also, just to note that all certificates released from the registry are sent via Express Post. That's a trackable mail as well. So we can advise the applicants, once their application has been registered and the certificate's being posted, we can provide them with that tracking number so they can see when they'll expect their certificate in the mail.
Thanks. There was a quick question about passports, which we touched on earlier. So the passports and now the Victorian birth certificates will have different categories, and how they translate across between the two documents. But they've also commented that they had read that the X marker on a passport might make it difficult to travel in the future. Any knowledge or comments to share?
From a passport's perspective, like I said, and that was earlier before we started the session, is that passports will update the marker. So your marker on your passport, the options are F for female, M for male, or X for other. So that would be non-binary, any other gender identifier that you go by. In relation to other countries accepting that, we can't comment on that. You would need to investigate that further, depending on what country you're wanting to travel to. Depending on what country it is, they've got strict rules, or they might be lax with it. You would probably need to speak to Passports Office just around that, and potentially DFAT, Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, in relation to travelling overseas with a passport that doesn't have, say, your common sex descriptors of whether it's male or female. But from a perspective of updating it, they will accept a birth certificate with your sex on it, or they'll accept a recognised details certificate with your new sex on that. So hopefully that answers it.
I might just add, in relation to the passport stuff, I did speak to DFAT, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, once about how we could deal with this issue. And one suggestion had been whether or not the Passports Office can provide one passport that has an X marker in it to be used in countries where the person feels safe to do that, and then a gendered M or F passport for ones where they may not feel safe. And DFAT was certainly of the view that they could not do that. So I tried, and that didn't work. But, I still think that could be an interesting advocacy project if anybody was minded to do so. But yeah, I will say, it does pose a risk. I think, we have to be honest that travelling as a trans and gender diverse person around the world does create greater sort of anxiety and safety risks in terms of border control at certain places. Unfortunately, that's the reality that we live in, and with the increase in body scanners and things like that, it can be a really stressful and difficult process for people. I just want to acknowledge that. I certainly find it a stressful and difficult process myself. So I made the decision to get a passport that said M as opposed to X, just on the basis of safety. But that certainly doesn't mean that everybody should make that decision. It's something that hopefully, in 10 years or whatever, we might be able to make decisions that are more true to how we feel about ourselves than having to worry about the practicality of how other governments and countries might deal with that. But yeah, it's a complicated one.
Thanks, Sam. I just do want to acknowledge that a lot of what has been said by the panelists today and attendees, it can be like deeply personal, and it can, yeah, just to acknowledge that a lot of the work you do that is done is like affects you personally, and can be difficult to deal with every day. We've had a few questions in the Q&A in the chat, and essentially it's how do we get other states to follow Victoria's lead? Which states have?
So my go-to on this question is actually Alastair Laurie, who is a lawyer who works for the Public Interest Advocacy Centre, and he's got a blog. I think it's alastairlaurie.net. I'll put it in the comments, and that is just a exhaustively comprehensive critique of all of the states and territories that don't have the kind of legislation that we want to see in Australia. So yeah, I think Alastair would be a great person to connect with around that if you're in New South Wales, because that's where the Public Interest Advocacy Centre is. Certainly if you're in other states and territories, I mean, Queensland, there's a LGBTIQ community legal service up in Queensland, in Brisbane. So you could potentially connect with that service to see what law reform work they're doing in there. WA, less clear on. I know a couple of really excellent advocates in WA that I'd be more than happy to connect people with if they happen to be from WA and want to work on that stuff. Just shoot me an email, but there isn't a sort of similar service like LGBTI legal service in WA at the moment.
Yeah, I think Vic and Queensland are the only ones with like a specific one. Yeah, Felicity.
Sorry, just did I unmute myself this time? I did. Just Equality Tasmania as well has also run similar campaigns, and in fact Tasmania were ahead of the game in terms of birth certificate reform. It's really important to recognise they were first cab off the rank rather than being the last. So they did fantastic work, and that was really crucial to some of the advocacy in Victoria to have the Tasmanian model to look at. The other thing is there is rainbow advocacy in South Australia as well, so they're useful to talk to, and there's also a Northern Territory rainbow advocacy group. Again, maybe Sam, we can put up the lists of all the state advocacy groups. I guess the issue is this is where the difference between state and federal law comes into its own. It is obviously very confusing for people to understand the difference between state and federal legislation that interacts with their identity and the forms and papers and everything, different acts. But yeah, birth certificates are state, passports are federal, and it's just really important to, I guess, support and learn from each other about the arguments that we've all had on a state level. Victoria is pretty progressive, so we're very, very lucky, but only the second time round. And again, it was one person advocacy with particular members of parliament. We're very lucky in Victoria, as they were in Tasmania, to have a member of parliament who had a trans child. And sometimes it is the personal stories that really matter when you're looking at law reform issues. And if other states and territories are looking at law reform around this, I think the key thing is to start having these conversations early with the policymakers and politicians who are potentially in the position to put through legislative change, because they need to feel confident that what they're being asked to do is reflective of the broad community. Like the ordinary people out there think it's okay and the sky's not going to fall in if you do this. So we built on what Tasmania had done, and I guess this is an opportunity for other states and territories to say, hey, look, people have been doing this in Victoria and the sky hasn't fallen in. It's still okay. So yeah, that would be my answer there, is just check out all of the different state groups, and then always just ask people for support from different states. I'm sure there's advocates in Victoria that are really happy to do a Zoom or get on a call with someone who wants to start a similar campaign there.
I think just following on from what you said at the end there, Felicity, it's really exciting to see, I guess, a bit of momentum, first with Tasmania and here. And in states who unfortunately don't have these kind of reforms yet, you can look and say, well, this is working here, and yeah, the sky hasn't fallen. Here is what 6 months or 12 months or 24 months, although hopefully not that long, looks like in Victoria, and things are running smoothly, and it has had a positive impact to those it's mattered to, and hasn't really impacted anyone that falls outside of that. I do also want to add, in advocacy and in advocating for this issue, talking to everyone was really important, not just people we felt pretty confident were going to support it, but also people we felt pretty confident weren't going to support it. And ultimately, we didn't necessarily change their positions in the end. We didn't necessarily, in some cases, votes perhaps shifted, perhaps didn't. But what was crucial there is there was no room for an argument that they'd been blindsided. There'd been no room to spin this as being sprung on them, and at least could encourage a bit of a dialogue so that there was an increased sense of civility about it, that even if they were going to go no, they perhaps wouldn't go as hard and aggressive and loud. So there's, even in those cases, a lot of value to be had in trying to set up meetings and set up discussions, communicate with anyone who'll listen, honestly.
Yeah. Sam has just posted a helpful link for passports, sex and gender diverse passports. Anything you want to say further, Sam?
So just to clarify, like, the two processes are different. So you would apply to Victorian births, deaths and marriages to change your Victorian birth certificate, but then you'd be applying to the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade to get your passport updated, and you do a full application form. And well, certainly pre-COVID, then you would go to the post office. I'm not quite sure what is happening as a practicality at the moment. Maybe it's still that. I'm just genuinely not sure. But you get something filled in by a doctor or a treating practitioner that says that they're providing like gender affirming healthcare, and that, you know, they accept that your identity is non-binary, for example. So that's how you do it with that. So they're kind of like two separate processes. So, you know, I can't see why you wouldn't be able to do that despite the implementation of birth certificate reform in Victoria.
Yeah, thanks. There is a question for Margot in the chat, but it's specifically about the TGV web form for I think accessing the funding that's available. Yep.
Right, I can't see that. Could you read it out for me?
Oh, it says there is an offer on the web form to give funds before rather than reimburse funds.
I see.
Yeah, I think it's just a tech issue more than anything.
No, that's a very good question. So our plan is to be able to offer both pre and post, so reimbursement or upfront payment, but we're still finalising the exact process. Yeah, it is coming, but there's obviously a few logistical considerations just around making sure fraud isn't happening or abuse of that system. But in cases where people can't afford the upfront costs and do need that additional support with a degree of urgency, I'd encourage you to contact us directly so that we can have a dialogue there and look at ways to do that. As we're beginning to get these processes in place, if you would like to be one of the early people that we sort of test that process out with, that's one way that obviously it benefits us to be able to kick the tires, but also to provide that support to community members. So please don't hesitate to get in touch. I'll drop our contact email in the chat.
Yeah. Also want to remind everyone of what Kira and Christina were saying, that if you're applying for a name and gender sex marker change at the same time, they'll waive one of the fees. We're approaching 2:30. If there are any questions that we haven't answered, please just like quickly raise your hand and we'll try to get to them. I want to say that this is being recorded, and it will be released afterwards with closed captioning. And we'll post those links to Facebook, etc. And I can also send around to people who've registered via Eventbrite all the resources people have been posting in the chat and some further information as well, some copies of the forms that are necessary. And if you haven't registered through Eventbrite, if you could email us. We have a website, LGBTIQlegal.org.au, or find us on Facebook. I think that's all questions for now. Thank you, everyone. Thank you all for everyone who asked a question. Thanks to everyone who attended and listened and passing on that information to friends and family and community. And also to our panelists. Anyone like to say little last bits and pieces?
I just wanted to share everyone this photo of a very excited non-binary child on the day we could go and get their form signed, and that's a lovely rainbow non-binary cake. See how happy they are. And that's just, I think, always good to remember just how profoundly life-changing some of the small things we do are. But they're excited, and everybody listening and on this panel who advocated for so long. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks to Kira and Christina from Birth, Deaths and Marriages for joining us. It's really great to be able to provide those, this question and answer session to community members in such a really, really weird time. Would you have a quick question? Bridie just wanted to thank you for running an amazing session. And there were a lot of things you discussed that they hadn't considered being an issue, like the HEX debts. And it was very informative. We've got some people saying thank you. I would like to say thank you again, Margot, as well as Sally and Brenda from TGV, who jumped in for some extra information. Felicity from Rainbow Families Victoria, Sam from LGBTIQ Legal, which is part of St Kilda and Thorn Harbour. And finally, Victoria Law Foundation for hosting. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, all right. Bye, everyone.